see everyone here this evening. This evening we're going to be in Acts chapter 14, and we're going to be looking at a very, very short sermon, as a matter of fact. And it is given by two people. I have as a title of that, this of Paul's second recorded sermon, but actually it's not just Paul. It is Paul and Barnabas. They both are part of this because that's what the book of Acts tells us about this. And this shows, actually this event, this thing that happens in Lystra, shows the extremes in which people can be, they can be manipulated. Going from one extreme, and then all of a sudden we've gone to another extreme. At the beginning of this, the people of Lystra, they are wanting to worship Paul and Barnabas. They've given them, they've designated, one's got to be Zeus, one's got to be Hermes. They've already designated who they are. And they're about to make sacrifices to them. And then the next thing you know, they want them dead. All right? But they're being manipulated. The first part is just their reaction to what they see. The next one is that they're being manipulated by people who are enemies of God. But let's begin in verse 8. So we're in Acts chapter 14, beginning in verse 8. And in Lystra, a certain man without strength in his feet was sitting, a cripple from his mother's womb, who had never walked. This man heard Paul speaking. Paul, observing him intently and seeing that he had faith to be healed, said with a loud voice, "Stand up straight on your feet." And he leaped and walked. So here is a miracle. This is a miracle that we've seen happen before, of the lame now walking, all right? But in the text, but here in Lystra, you know, they would be accustomed to this in places like Jerusalem. They would have seen this a lot. But in Lystra, they haven't seen this. And so this is very astounding that this has happened. Just in saying, stand up straight on your feet, and immediately the man can stand, but he's also leaping and he's walking around. Now, verse 11, when the people saw that what Paul had done, they raised their voices, saying in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men." All right, that's exactly what that's one thing Paul did not want them to think. Okay? That is one of now. There've been other things Paul wouldn't want them to think, and that's one of them. One of the things is that they're attributing this to the Greek gods, to the Roman gods. They're attributing it to them, and that would be a natural response, actually, and that would be a response of understanding. Nobody can do this. This is confirming the message and the messenger. And nobody can do this unless there is some superpower behind it, but also a benevolent one. It has to be a benevolent one. If it were a wicked power, well, it certainly wouldn't be going about doing good. It would care nothing about a lame man. Some kind of wicked power would be doing something altogether different. But here they say the gods have come down in the likeness of men. And Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. So we can see in this, they've already assigned them names. They think they know who they are. Gods have come down in the likeness of men. Okay, he's Zeus, he's Hermes. Why is he Hermes? Because he's the one who's the chief speaker. That's why. And Hermes is like a messenger of the gods. He's the one speaking here. And so that tells us basically when Paul and Barnabas would go into a place that Paul would be the chief speaker, that Barnabas would allow Paul to let him have the main say, if you will. Let him do the speaking. But what's about to happen, they're both going to be active in this. They're both are going to want to put this to a stop as quickly as possible. And I want to also add that if Paul or Barnabas had it in their heads of kind of if they were of a sort that wanted to manipulate people or they wanted to take advantage of people, they would have it right here. If that's what they wanted, they'd have it completely. That they could now pose as Zeus and Hermes, and they didn't have to say it. They didn't have to say it. That's already been pronounced by the people of Lystra. They're the ones that have done that. Now, we see just how bad this gets. Then the priest of Zeus, who else to know who Zeus is other than the priest of Zeus? I mean, if there's anybody that's going to give a stamp of approval on this, it would be him, one would think. Well, if he's involved, that must be Zeus. But then the priest of Zeus, whose temple was in front of their city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates, intending to sacrifice with the multitudes. Okay, this is not the response that Paul and Barnabas wanted. This is not exactly what they were hoping for. But it does show, in fact, that miracles have a conclusion. They imply something. Someone who performs a real miracle that no one can deny, some great act that has been done. Well, what did Nicodemus say to Jesus? We know that you are a man from God, teacher from God, because no man can do these things unless God be with him. That's the conclusion. Everybody knew that conclusion. Even the enemies of Christ knew that conclusion. They didn't like it. They would suppress it. They'd fight against it, try to do whatever they could. But here we see where they are coming out to with the conclusion they've made. Here is Zeus and Hermes standing before them. Now, we come to verse 14. Because Paul and Barnabas aren't going to allow this to occur. They're not just going to stand by and be worshiped by these people of Lystra. They're not going to do it. Now, if you recall, with John, in the book of Revelation, an angel appears before him. And of course, in the book of Revelation, he sees many angels. He sees them by the millions, as a matter of fact. He can't even number them. But there's an angel before him, and he falls down to worship that angel. And the angel says, see that you don't do that. All right, don't do that. You do not worship me, because I am a fellow servant like you. I'm not God. I'm just a fellow servant like you. Don't do that. And that's what Barnabas and Paul are doing. They're both going to stop this. You are not going to be worshiping us. You're not going to sacrifice animals to us. But this is an excellent opportunity to explain what you're doing. This is not what we're about. This is what we're about. This is what we're not. We're not Zeus and Hermes, but this is who we are. We are servants of God, the God of heaven and earth. Now, we'll get to that in just a second, but verse 14 first. But when the apostles, Barnabas and Paul heard this, they tore their clothes and ran in among the multitude, crying out. Both of them doing this. This is mutually done. It's an immediate response of, no, you're not going to do this. No, you are not. And so we come to their words, and their words are trying to teach the city of pagan worshipers. City of, you've got the priest of Zeus who is there with oxen and garlands. You have the other people from Lystra who are there. But they are going to stop this. Now, verse 15, we have their message. And their message really only occupies 3 verses. But there are different points we want to look at in these 3 verses. Now, last week we looked in chapter 13 with Paul's first recorded sermon. And in his first recorded sermon, he is addressing Jews. And in addressing Jews, he really begins giving points that they would all agree with. There's nobody in that synagogue that would have disagreed with those first points he's making, because he's talking about things that they would have well understood, well taught, well read in the Old Testament concerning their fathers. They would know it. And any mistakes that their fathers made, they would know that too. And there would be nothing offensive whatsoever in pointing out this is what they did, because they would all realize, yeah, that's in the text. Moses did write about that, or Joshua did write about that. And they would get it. But they're not addressing Jews here. All right? What advantage did the Jewish nation have? What advantage? They had the oracles of God. What does that mean? They had the prophets given to them first. Now, it is true, and we've said it on occasion, it is true that while the prophets are given to them first, we do see others who have an understanding of those prophets as well. And they don't live in Israel, and they're not Jewish either. But they have an understanding of these things. They understand when Pontius Pilate himself asks, "Are you king of the Jews?" There's more in that is implied. That carries more of a message, more of a meaning than just, yeah, this is a king that would be here in Jerusalem over the Jews if the Romans hadn't been here. All right? It doesn't mean that. It means a lot more than that. They would understand, I think he understood as well, that Jesus, what he understood, Jesus is not a political threat. Jesus is not a threat to Rome in the least. In the least, Jesus of Nazareth is just a man that a lot of things are being said about him, but he's not exactly raising an army, and his followers aren't exactly militant, and there isn't uprisings in the street except for those who hate him. They're the ones with the uprisings in the street. They're the ones who they've got murder in their eyes. They're the ones, not Jesus. Not him at all. Now, we come to this, and here we have Paul saying in this, and Paul and Barnabas, "Men, why are you doing these things?" Here's the first point. All right, and the first point is what you're doing actually is wrong. I mean, that's the first point they make. They don't mince words in this. They're asking, why are you doing these things? We also are men with the same nature as you. This is, you don't need to be doing this because this is what we are. All right, what is that? What is that? You don't need to be worshiping us because we're just men. We are just men. That is it. So, you can take the oxen back into the pen. You don't need to be sacrificing to us at all. We are only men. You don't worship anyone other than God. Now, what they're going to say with this, and we'll get to it in just a second, but not only should you not be worshiping us, you also shouldn't be worshiping Zeus and Hermes. That's what it comes down to. Now, they're not going to say those names. And you shouldn't be worshiping these other matters. So they are, one, addressing the issue immediately. This, you don't do this. Okay? And that's a rebuke. That's a rebuke. That's a plea. Don't do this. And the reason is, we're just men like you. Now the next point, but this is what we are. We're not who you think we are. We're not gods who come down as in the likeness of men. But they say, and preach to you that you should turn from these useless things to the living God. Well, who are the useless things? It would be their entire pantheon. I look around that city and you would see all these temples, the things that they had put so much effort into, so much of their lives into, their parents' lives, grandparents' lives, all for years going back and worshiping these things that are useless. They're not mincing their words at all. Useless things. Because that's what they are. Zeus, what is he? He is a work of fiction and a work of artistry of one sort or another, whether it's out of stone, carved crudely, clay molded crudely, or skillfully in all. It doesn't matter. It's things. These are things, and they are useless. Entirely useless. So they're addressing the issue that they need immediately. Now, unlike what we see with Acts chapter 13, with Paul speaking to the Jews, they have to approach it from a different way, from a different direction. Not contradicting anything, they just have to approach it from a different thing, because they cannot talk about our fathers in the past, our father Abraham, and they have no idea who you're talking about. Abraham. Okay. Who is that? I don't understand that. Because their father isn't Abraham. And they would not have a commonality of that history at all. Commonality in that they're humans too, they're souls too, souls that need to be saved. Yes, and that's why they're there. They are there to preach to them that they are to turn from these useless things to the living God. These others are fictional characters. Jehovah is real and extraordinarily powerful. Matter of fact, using the word extraordinary is not enough. He is omnipotent. The gods that they had been worshiping are meaningless. And we come to the next point in this verse, verse 15. Who made, here's the living God, who made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all things that are in them. One God did that. Now, the stories that they would have had, the things passed down through the generations, they'd have a different image of the world itself. They'd have a different image of life and reality. Because with them, you have a God of the sea. You have a God of sky and thunder, and gods of the hunt, or God of the hunt, a God of you name it, drunkenness, a God of, they have a gods for everything. Okay? But here he's saying you have this, they are telling them, you have a living God, there is a living God, Him only, He made all things. Now, He's not the God of drunkenness, that's the people doing that, but He has made all these things. So they would understand that there is deity. There's something extremely powerful beyond this earth. They'd understand that. They'd get that. So they're not talking, Paul and Barnabas are not giving them something that they cannot comprehend. But they'd understand that. They'd get it. Now, let's match this up with what they just did. They just healed a lame man. And now they're saying Zeus and Hermes are useless things. All right? If Zeus and Hermes have a problem with it, let them do something about it. Okay, let them do something about it. But what you just saw, have you ever seen Zeus do that? Have you ever seen Hermes do that? Have you ever seen the priest of Zeus do that? No? If they had, they wouldn't be making this big to-do about what they have seen. Now we come to verse 16. Who in bygone generations, that we're still talking about the living God, who in bygone generations allowed all nations to walk in their own ways. But that's bygone generations. This is exactly like what Paul states in Acts chapter 17 to the Athenians of the days of this ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent. God, that time's over. That's bygone generations. There was a time when God overlooked this ignorance, but He doesn't overlook it anymore, because there is the perfect law of liberty. There is the doctrine of Christ. There is the means by which to teach this to people so that they can have salvation. That ignorance is no place of safety. Never was, never will be. I remember as a kid hearing the phrase, "what you don't know can hurt you." I was just a small kid. I'm thinking, what I don't know can hurt me. That means I've got to know something. That means school. Okay, I didn't like that. Couldn't it be that what you don't know, it's okay if you don't know? No, there's certain things if you don't know it, yeah, that'll hurt you. It'll hurt you if you don't know that something it can kill you. Yeah, you start messing around with something that can kill you. Guess what's going to happen? But here, he is telling them this time of ignorance, this time of this thing of behavior, God allowed this to occur. He allowed these things to happen. And how He's going to judge it, He's going to judge it. He's already judged. We already know how He judges some. But just this morning we were talking about Sodom and Gomorrah. We know how He judged them. And with Jesus saying, this is also a judgment. Jesus saying that it's going to be easier in the day of judgment for Sodom and Gomorrah than for you, for the people that He was talking to. It's going to be easier. That's not that things are going to be good on the day of judgment for Sodom and Gomorrah, but they would be easier for them living in the ancient past, not having so much as heard of the Messiah, than for those standing before the Messiah, rejecting Him right then and there. Now, these bygone generations, God allowed that to happen. Now we come to verse 17, where He says, nevertheless. Okay, that means whatever was true in the past, okay, it's not true now. God allowed these things in the past, but He's not allowing it now. It's just like what Paul said there in Acts chapter 17, but now commands all men everywhere to repent. That's in the past, but now is where you live. Now is where this message is being given. But he says, nevertheless, in all that time, He did not leave Himself without witness. In what way? Well, He's going to mention some ways, but by nature itself is a witness. And we've discussed it before, that there were Greeks who looked at nature and they saw a temperance in it, a gentleness in it. There are harsh things. Yeah, there are storms. There's lightning. There are earthquakes. There are volcanoes. There are things about that. But generally speaking, there's regularity to it. There is rain and the flow of water, high tide, low tide. You can expect high tide to be here and low tide to be there. And you can expect certain times of the year it's going to be warmer to hot to cooler to cold and coming back around again. There was a regularity about it of a planting season, growing season, a harvesting. You could just expect it, that all these things are regular, all these things occur. Now, how's it happening? How is it happening? Because there has to be a cause behind it. There's got to be. And there were Greeks who thought there's no way that that crew on Mount Olympus could be doing this, because Mount Olympus is like the bad neighbors you might have, that every weekend the police have to visit the place. All right? That's like what Mount Olympus is. They couldn't rule anything. They couldn't organize anything whatsoever, much less a world so that mankind could live peaceably from generation to generation to generation to generation. And so there is witness that in nature itself, whoever has done this has got to have a love for mankind. Has got to. That while, yes, tidal waves, hurricanes, tornadoes, disease, volcanoes, all of these things do occur. But what's the population of the earth right now? Obviously, it doesn't diminish us by much. And perhaps those things are for our learning anyway. It doesn't, we're still here. We're still growing. And we still have the propensity to continue to grow because this earth is made for that. So is all that a witness to the living God? It's not a witness to Zeus. It's not a witness to Hermes. It's not a witness to that crew, because that crew is like just a group of people that are always fussing at each other, fussing and fighting and at odds with each other, and the whole creation would be counterproductive, all these forces working against each other, that mankind couldn't live. So there is witness in this that there must be someone else. Yes, God, deity, but there's got to be someone else other than what we've been told. And Paul and Barnabas are there to give them that. Notice in the next part of this verse, he didn't leave us without witness in that he did good. And that's what we're talking about. In that he did good. That goodness is with God. That he gives to us very well. Now, just because we have things that occur, and we've already named, and we can name more of pestilence and famine and drought, we can name more things, but by and large, the earth is more gentle than it is harsh. It is more of a place that's home than a place that is trying to kill you. Now, maybe there are things set in this earth that they are good even when we don't like it. Maybe they're good because it is trying to tell us, this place is not a permanent home for you. Maybe it's trying to tell all of us that, this place, while it has its beauty, while it has its comforts, it also has its failures. And it's running down, and so are you. And we're not living here forever. And we've got to prepare ourselves for what is going to be, and prepare ourselves by, in fact, serving God. Now, he did good. Next part, gave us rain from heaven. So here is part of what he did. And what did that rain produce? And fruitful seasons. We're able to have water. We're able to have food. The earth continues on from one century to the next, continuing to go on. And who's responsible for this? It is that living God that's responsible for that, filling our hearts with food and gladness. So there is an understanding from God that yes, we have to be filled, but also there's the emotional side to us, a full recognition of the emotional side, food and gladness of giving to us and trying to help us along. Now, verse 18, and with these sayings they could scarcely restrain the multitude from sacrificing to them. Even though they are saying these things, the multitude they just want to do what they want to do. And they don't quite, I don't think they have got it in their head just quite yet that they shouldn't be doing this, even though Paul and Barnabas have been telling them. Now we come to the next part. The Jews from Antioch and Iconium came there, and having persuaded the multitudes, they stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, supposing him to be dead. There's people that can be manipulated. They go from scarcely being stopped from sacrificing to him to now taking Paul out and stoning him to death. That's what they do. Now we see this, however, when the disciples gathered around him, he rose up and went into the city, and the next day he departed with Barnabas to Derbe. There is someone that, yeah, he has faith. There's someone, he understands his duty. He's just been rejected. Actually, he hasn't been rejected. It's the word that's been rejected. And you have people, these Jews from Antioch and Iconium, they've come there and they've just riled the people up. They just riled them up, and the next thing you know, they're stoning Paul. Well, this is how people can be, going from one extreme to another. But in this, what did Paul say, or Barnabas say, that was worthy of death? What was it that they said? There's not a single thing that they said. And I'm sure that the people in this area would have known quite well that the Jews didn't agree with sacrificing to Zeus and Hermes. They would understand that. They would understand that there are people that aren't from Lystra, or maybe even are from Lystra, that they would not be worshiping these gods. They would be worshiping something else or somebody else. And the Jews would be one of just a certain one of those. So, it's not like they're disagreeing with the idea that they shouldn't be sacrificing to the Greek gods, because the Jews would be saying the same thing. So that all should be stoned if that were the case. No, it's these wicked men came in and they riled up. They persuaded the multitude. And you go from wanting to sacrifice to this Hermes to now killing him. And at least wanting to kill him. And of course there is supposing him to be dead. And I would go with that, supposing him to be dead. Was he dead? They thought he was. We'll go with that. They thought he was. And I personally know and have friends that believe that he was dead. And I'm not going to say he wasn't. But they certainly thought that he was. Supposing him to be dead, they went off. Nevertheless, we can know that Paul, whether in the Spirit or out of the Spirit, he went to that third heaven, and he saw things, and he heard things, and he talks about this later in his writings in 2 Corinthians. He talks about this. Is this when that happened? It would be speculation. Don't know. They have no idea. I would have differing thoughts on it, but it hardly matters. Now, let's just go to what the sermon was about. First off, dealing with what the people needed to know first. That's what they need to know. All right. First, stop what you're doing. That's no good. Next, stop worshiping. Not only do not worship us, you don't need to be worshiping these other things either. And then trying to reason them into understanding who it is they are to worship. And then going of this is how he served. This is how he worshiped. And this is what has been done. In those days, they would have had little to no writing on the various things that they worshiped. It would all be by oral tradition. There would be some things that would have been written, but they would have been written a long time earlier and just come down the line. But when it comes to the Bible is fully written out. The Bible is fully written so that there's no guesswork whatsoever. There's no guesswork as to who God is or how he is worshiped or who his son is. There's no guesswork as to what sins are and what the problem with humanity happens to be, the big problem. There's no guesswork, and that God has solved that problem for us because he is loving. He's our creator, and he is righteous, and that is good. We need to look at our own lives and look at the words given to us. And this would be a way of understanding how to approach people of different backgrounds. But it's not shying away from what they obviously have wrong, but helping them out, and understanding I realize this is what you believe, this is what you do, and you need to stop it, because this is reality. This is who God is. We will all face judgment. We will all be at the judgment day. Not a single person will be missing from that. And we'll all be before Jesus of Nazareth, the judge, and he's going to judge us according to his standard. Now, as Paul and Barnabas stated, in bygone generations, God allowed these things to occur. The nations do whatever that they were going to do. He allowed that. But that's bygone generations. That's not true anymore. It wasn't true then, and it's certainly not true today. And ignorance is not a place where you can be and be pleasing to God or have an excuse. It is not. We ask this evening, if you need to respond to the invitation, we ask that you come as we stand and sing.